This module, we learned about encouraging study habits. But one of the things that we need to also discuss is how to encourage those study habits with remote learning and what is best practice. Now, when we talk about remote learning, there's an inherent difficulty, which is the lack of equity. And we saw a lot of that taking place at the end of the last school year. Not every child had the access to broadband internet. And with so many people working at home, a lot of students were impacted by this. Another issue is equipment access. Do they have a computer or an iPad? New York City has done its best to make sure that every child has the equipment needed for remote learning. But what we found is, did they get actual time on it in their house? Was a parent using it? Was a sibling using it? Was it sold? Some of the things we can't control. Another problem is lack of basic computer skills. We assume that every child who got a computer or an iPad knew how to use it. This is not necessarily the case, especially when we're talking about very young children. And this can be a real issue, not only for the student, but for the parent and also for the teacher. We also assume that every teacher knows how to turn on their computer and use remote learning. This is not necessarily the case. Lots of people are scared of computers, and that can impact learning. Another issue is lack of guidance. This can be both from the teacher as well as from the family. If you're working at home, you don't necessarily have the time to sit with the child the entire day and really help them turn on the computer, take the skills to the next level. A lot of teachers who were so intimidated by what went on basically checked out and didn't work with their students. So we found that lack of guidance was also a big issue. The biggest issue is distraction. When we're talking about New York City, we have a lot of people usually pushed into a small space. Finding that quiet space to work is really difficult. When we were in our module discussing encouraging study habits, we discussed distraction and finding a place where children could find a quiet spot. That necessarily is not the case anymore. They can't find it in your classroom. They can't find it in the local library. They can't find it in the park. So we're dealing with a lot when we talk about remote learning. One of the things that can help us when we think about how to teach in this remote environment is ULD, Universal Learning Design. And this is a really good way to start to frame how we get children to be able to study when they're at home. This is broken down into 3 parts. One is to provide multiple means of engagement. One is to do providing multiple means of representation and providing multiple means of actions and expressions. So when we talk about the multiple means of engagement, we want to talk about how are we going to get our goals and objectives out there? How are we going to make sure that we're minimizing distractions, that everything we're teaching is relevant, and really help to promote self-assessment and reflection in the student? And this is something we need to think about when we start to design. The next thing that we need to think about is multiple means of representation. So we want to offer ways to customize the display of information. So we want to make sure that there are things that people can read. There are things that people can see. There are things that people can listen to. We want to make sure that everyone has access to this when we start to design our course. And we want to make sure that we're varying the methods for response and navigation. We want this to be something that's interactive, where there's multiple media for communication, there's multiple tools, and that we have different levels of support for performance. So when we're designing these ways to help children study and learn at home, we need to put these ideas into what we design. Now, to that end, I have designed an escape the room. And the reason that I did an escape the room is because it gives you an overview of resources. It gives you an overview of videos, materials, but in a way that's very interactive and hopefully fun. When you start to think about how to design this so that children are minimizing the distractions, one of the ways is to really engage the children and the students. Hopefully by using games and by using different methods of communication, we're able to make sure that at least one of the different things that we've given the children to understand is going to sink into them. They're going to understand it. So whether it be articles, whether it be videos, whether it be interactive games, we find ways to grab that child's attention. And only if one of those mediums get through to the child, it's still successful. They're still getting the information. So we really want to make sure that we have multiple methods for engaging the learner. So take a look at the game. Don't feel any pressure when you're doing it. It's supposed to be fun. And see if as you do it, you start to understand and think of ways that you can engage the learner so that when they're home studying, no matter the distraction, they still are gaining that information.